Ethan Caldwell was just an ordinary IT employee, a single father who spent every day racing between his job and his 8-year-old daughter. And Victoria Hale was a billionaire female CEO, someone almost no one in the entire building dared to look directly in the eye. A computer glitch that seemed insignificant at first accidentally revealed a private photograph. And from that moment on, an unexpected question was spoken, by the most powerful woman in the tower herself. "Do you think I'm beautiful?" Could a single moment of honesty, completely unguarded, be enough to shake the walls she had spent years building around herself? If you enjoy stories that touch the heart and reveal the hidden sides behind power, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow what happens next. And what do you think? When someone who has long hidden behind fame and status begins to question her own worth, what will happen next? To her, and to the man who simply happened to step into that moment. The elevator to the 40th floor moved so fast that Ethan Caldwell had to grip the toolbox in his hands tightly. He watched the numbers flash by in quick succession. 36, 37, 38. In 3 years of working at North Lake Systems, he had never been this high up. Ethan's familiar territory was the 3rd floor, where office workers were crammed into small cubicles, and no one paid attention when he crawled under desks to fix network wiring or replace a faulty cable. Down there, he was almost invisible. The 40th floor was different. This was the executive level, where even the assistants wore suits more expensive than his entire month's rent, and every conversation happened behind closed doors, not meant for outsiders. Ethan had heard plenty of stories about this top floor. Everyone had. It was where Victoria Hale's office occupied the entire north wing of the building, with floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooking the city, as if she owned every building in sight. And in truth, she probably did own a significant portion of them. Ding. The elevator doors opened onto a reception area that looked more like an art museum than an office. Cold, gleaming marble floors. Abstract paintings lining the walls. Beautiful, though Ethan couldn't make sense of them. A dark wood reception desk, polished to a shine under recessed lighting. A woman in her 50s looked up from behind the desk. Her smile was pleasant, but efficient. The kind of smile perfected through tens of thousands of repetitions. "Ethan Caldwell, IT department," he said, holding up his employee badge, even though it was obvious she already knew who he was. "Ms. Hale is expecting you. 3rd door on the left." Susan Whitmore gestured toward a hallway that seemed to stretch endlessly. "She has meetings starting in 45 minutes, so she'll need the system operational before then." Ethan nodded and walked on. His shoes made the faintest sounds against the marble floor, as if the space itself was unaccustomed to his presence. Through the windows on the right, the entire city of Bellevue spread out below. It was 10 in the morning. Sunlight made everything look clean, sharp, almost flawless. From this height, traffic, noise, and chaos dissolved into something strangely peaceful. Ethan stopped in front of the 3rd door. It was already open. Victoria Hale stood behind her desk with her back to him, a phone pressed to her ear. She was tall, taller than he had imagined from the rare moments he'd seen her in company-wide emails, or striding through the lobby with a silent entourage of assistants trailing behind her. Her black hair was pulled into a bun that looked effortless, though Ethan knew that kind of effortlessness was carefully crafted by a professional. She wore a charcoal gray suit tailored to absolute perfection, clearly custom-made, and without question. "I don't care what the forecasts say," she said into the phone. Her voice was tightly controlled, but Ethan could still hear the sharp edge beneath it. "If the Tokyo office can't deliver the numbers they promised, we restructure. I don't want to hear any excuses." Ethan stood at the threshold, unsure whether he should announce himself or continue waiting. In the end, he chose to remain still, quiet, just as he had always been throughout the years. Victoria ended the call and turned around. For a brief second, her eyes swept over Ethan with an evaluative look that made him feel like a balance sheet being reviewed. Then something in her expression subtly shifted, less sharp, almost imperceptibly so. "You're from IT," she said, not a question. "Yes, ma'am. Ethan Caldwell. I received the call about the system issue. It froze during a video meeting 20 minutes ago. Didn't restart properly." She gestured toward the massive desk, where 3 screens sat dark and lifeless. "I have presentations to review before investor meetings this afternoon." "Let me take a look," Ethan said, moving toward the desk. He set his toolbox carefully in the corner, taking care not to disturb the neatly arranged stacks of documents on the surface, everything radiating an air of absolute control. Victoria stepped back to give him space, but she didn't leave. She stood near the window, arms crossed, watching in silence. Ethan tried to ignore the feeling of being observed. He was used to working with people hovering behind him, asking how much longer it would take, or re-explaining the problem as if he hadn't understood it the first time. But Victoria was different. She said nothing. She simply watched, with the same intensity she had likely carried into thousands of boardrooms before. Ethan powered the system down completely, checked the connections, then initiated a hard reboot. The screens flickered on one by one. He monitored the startup sequence, waiting for any error messages or warning signs. The main screen loaded her desktop. Clean, organized. Folders labeled by project names and dates. Nothing personal, except the wallpaper began to appear. Ethan's hand froze on the keyboard. It wasn't supposed to show like this. Normally, the system would go straight to the login screen, but something in the malfunction had disrupted the sequence, and now the wallpaper filled the central display in full resolution. It was a photograph of Victoria, standing beside a lake. She was wearing jeans and a simple white shirt, standing on a wooden dock, endless water stretching behind her. There was no makeup that Ethan could discern. Her hair fell naturally around her shoulders. She was smiling, not the controlled smile from corporate portraits, but something genuine, unguarded. Sunlight touched her face in a way that made her look younger, softer, more human. Ethan reached for the keyboard, intending to close it quickly, return to the login screen, and pretend he had never seen anything. "Stop!" Victoria's voice cut through the quiet room. Ethan's hand halted mid-motion. He looked up and realized she was standing much closer than before. Close enough for him to catch the exact moment her expression shifted, from neutral observation to something harder to read. She was staring at the screen, at the image of herself reflected there. "You've seen it," she said. Not a question, just an acknowledgement. Ethan wanted to lie. Every instinct urged him to protect himself, to preserve the professional distance between a billionaire CEO and an IT technician fixing a computer. But something in her voice, in the way she looked at the photograph as if she had forgotten it existed, stopped him. "Yes," he said. "I'm sorry. The system loaded incorrectly. I didn't mean to—" "I know you didn't." Victoria stepped closer to the desk, her eyes still fixed on the screen. "It was taken 3 years ago. I forgot I'd set it as my wallpaper." Ethan didn't know what to say, so he remained silent. Victoria turned to look directly at him, and this time he saw something in her eyes he hadn't expected. Not anger, not embarrassment, but curiosity, mixed with something he couldn't quite name. "What do you think?" she asked. "Sorry?" "About the photograph. she said slowly. What do you think when you see it? Ethan felt as though he had stepped into a conversation conducted in an entirely different language. Executives didn't ask IT technicians for opinions on personal photos. They barely acknowledged IT technicians existed, unless something was broken. I don't think my opinion matters, Ms. Hale, he replied cautiously. But you have one. She tilted her head, studying him with the same intensity she'd shown when he first entered the room. Everyone has an opinion. They just usually don't say it. Ethan looked back at the photograph, at the woman standing by the lake in simple clothes, without an entourage, without an audience. It's a beautiful picture, he said at last. You look happy in it. Happy? Victoria repeated the word, as if weighing it. Is that all? There was something in her voice, like a challenge or a test. Ethan understood that his next words mattered more than they should. He could choose the safe response. Say she looked professional, polished, successful. Or he could tell the truth. You look real, Ethan said, like a human being, not a position. The silence that followed felt enormous. Ethan immediately regretted his honesty. He had crossed a line, said something too personal, revealed too much of what he truly thought. He waited for her to ask him to leave, waited for a complaint email to be sent to his supervisor, waited for a cold reminder that he was here to fix computers, and nothing more. But instead, Victoria turned away from the screen and looked directly at him. The expression on her face was completely unreadable. Do you think I'm beautiful? The question dropped into the room like a heavy object hitting the floor. Ethan stared at her, convinced he had misheard. I'm sorry. What? It's a simple question. Victoria's voice was calm, almost as if she were asking about quarterly financial forecasts. In that photograph, do you think I'm beautiful? Ethan's mind raced through every possible reaction. This had to be a test, or a trap. Executives didn't ask employees questions like this. It violated every unspoken rule about professional boundaries and power. But she was waiting for an answer. And something in her eyes told him. She would know immediately if he lied. Yes, Ethan said quietly, you are beautiful in that photograph, but not because of anything related to your appearance. Victoria's eyebrow lifted slightly. Explain that. You look peaceful, Ethan said, and the words began to come more easily now that he had chosen honesty. As if you were exactly where you wanted to be, doing something you chose for yourself. That's what makes the picture beautiful, he continued. Not your face, not the clothes, not anything else. Just, you look like yourself. The silence stretched again. Victoria stood very still, her face revealing nothing. Ethan couldn't tell whether he had said exactly the right thing, or made a serious mistake. Then something changed. The mask of control she had worn since the moment he entered the room cracked, just slightly, revealing something beneath it that looked almost like relief. No one has said that to me in a very long time, she said softly, that I look like myself. Ethan didn't know how to respond, so he stayed silent. Victoria turned back toward the window, re-establishing distance between them. When she spoke again, her voice had returned to its familiar control, but something in it was different, less certain. Complete the login sequence. I need access to those files before the meetings. Yes, ma'am. Ethan turned back to the computer. His hands moved automatically through the familiar steps, bringing up the login screen, entering administrative credentials, resetting the session. The photograph disappeared, replaced by the company's standard interface. When the desktop appeared, clean, orderly, entirely professional, Ethan stepped back. Everything is functioning normally now. If you encounter any further issues, Just contact the help desk. They'll send someone up." "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell." Ethan packed up his toolbox and walked toward the door. He was almost in the hallway when her voice stopped him. "Ethan." He turned back. Victoria was still standing by the window, outlined by the morning sunlight streaming through the glass. "Thank you for being honest with me," she said. "Most people aren't." Ethan nodded, unsure what to say. Then he left, closing the door softly behind him. The elevator ride back down to the third floor felt completely different from the ride up. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, though he couldn't name what it was. He replayed the conversation in his mind, analyzing every word, trying to understand what had really happened in that high-floor office. When he returned to his desk, his phone buzzed with 3 new support tickets. Someone's printer was jammed. Someone else couldn't access their email. Familiar problems. Familiar work. But Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the photograph by the lake, about the question Victoria Hale had asked him, and about the way she had looked at herself, as if she had forgotten that version of herself ever existed. He spent the rest of the day moving between floors, fixing computers, resetting passwords, explaining for the 100th time that turning it off and on again really did solve most problems. At 3 p.m., his daughter, Lucy, texted to remind him about the parent-teacher meeting that evening. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji and a promise to pick her up on time. An ordinary day. An ordinary life. Ordinary problems. Except for one thing. Ethan couldn't forget the way Victoria Hale had looked at the photograph of herself, as if she had only just remembered that version of herself had once existed. Ethan picked Lucy up from school at 3:30, just like every day. She climbed into the passenger seat of the 10-year-old Honda, her backpack dragging behind her, her mouth already chattering non-stop about the science project her class would be starting next week. "I already got assigned a partner. Maya said she wants to work with me," Lucy said without stopping to breathe. "That's good, because she's really smart, and she won't make me do all the work like Justin did last time." Ethan pulled away from the curb, listening to half of his daughter's steady stream of words, while the other half of his mind drifted back up to the 40th floor, to the photograph, to the look in Victoria Hale's eyes, to the question she had asked him. "Dad," Lucy said, "are you listening to me?" "I am," Ethan answered quickly. "Maya working with you is great, sweetheart." Lucy glanced at him with a look she had perfected over her 8 years of life, the look that said she knew exactly when her father was only pretending to pay attention. "I said Maya might be moving to California," she emphasized. "Her dad got a new job." "Oh." Ethan focused on the road, on the conversation, trying to push Victoria Hale out of his mind. That must be hard. I'm sorry." "It's okay," Lucy said, shrugging. "She hasn't moved yet, and we can still video call." They stopped at the grocery store on the way home. Standing in front of the cereal aisle, Ethan caught his own reflection in the glass. A 35-year-old man, the first strands of gray threaded through dark hair, a wrinkled shirt after a long day of work, tired in a way that sleep alone could not fix. 3 years. 3 years since Linda died. 3 years since the phone call from the hospital that shattered his life into pieces. Late-stage cancer. Discovered too late. 7 months, from diagnosis until... "Dad?" Lucy's voice pulled him back to the present. She held up a box of cereal with a brightly colored cartoon character on the front. "Can I get this one?" Ethan was about to say no out of habit. Then he looked into her eyes exactly like her mother's, and nodded. "Okay," he said. "Sweetheart." Small victories in the endless negotiation of single parenthood. The parent-teacher meeting went smoothly. Lucy was doing well in all her subjects. She might struggle a bit with math, but nothing to worry about. The teacher said she was creative and thoughtful, sometimes a little too quiet during group work. Ethan nodded, took careful notes, and promised to help her practice multiplication tables. An ordinary evening, a familiar rhythm, a life that appeared completely fine. But later that night, after Lucy had fallen asleep, Ethan found himself sitting alone at the kitchen table, staring at his open laptop. The cup of coffee beside him had gone cold. He thought about the distance between who people believe we are and who we actually feel like inside. He thought about Victoria Hale, about how she might return each night to some penthouse apartment surrounded by luxury, achievement, and power, and yet feel utterly alone. Ethan closed the laptop and stood up to go to bed. In the darkness of the bedroom, Ethan paused beside the nightstand. There was a photograph there. Linda smiling, holding Lucy when she was 5 years old. A day in the park, before illness arrived and took everything away. "What would you think about this?" he whispered into the darkness. Linda couldn't answer, but Ethan knew. If she were still here, she would tell him to stop living like a shadow, to stop being afraid, to stop making himself invisible. "You always said I played things too safe," he murmured with a faint smile in the dark. "You always wanted me to be braver." Now, it seemed the universe was giving him a chance to do exactly that. The next morning began like every other morning. Ethan dropped Lucy off at school, drove to North Lake Systems, took the elevator up to the 3rd floor, and sat down at his desk with a list of support tickets already waiting. Paper jam. Password reset. Someone's computer making a strange noise. At 9:45, his desk phone rang. "IT department, this is Ethan." "Mr. Caldwell, this is Margaret Doyle from Executive Administration. Ms. Hale would like to see you in her office at 10 o'clock. The words landed like cold water. Ethan straightened in his chair, his mind immediately jumping to the worst-case scenarios. "Is there a technical issue?" he asked, trying to keep his tone steady. "Ms. Hale didn't specify. She only requested your presence at 10. Ethan stared at the phone for a long moment. Around him, the 3rd floor continued its normal Friday rhythm. Someone was complaining about the coffee machine. Someone else was making weekend plans. He glanced at the clock. 9:46. 14 minutes to figure out what he had done wrong and how to fix it. He replayed yesterday's conversation in his head. He had been honest, perhaps too honest, but she had asked. She had directly asked for his opinion, and he had given it without any ulterior motive, without trying to manipulate or gain anything from it. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe his honesty had been interpreted as disrespect. By 10 o'clock, Ethan had convinced himself he was about to be fired. The elevator ride up to the 40th floor felt longer this time. He watched the numbers climb and tried to prepare himself for the conversation ahead. He had worked at North Lake Systems for 3 years. It was a good, stable job, with benefits. He couldn't afford to lose it. The receptionist recognized him this time and waved him through without checking his badge. Ethan walked down the marble hallway, his reflection moving beside him in the polished floor. Victoria Hale's office door was closed. He knocked twice. "Come in." He opened the door and saw her standing by the window again, looking out over the city. She was wearing a navy blue suit today, another perfectly tailored piece that probably cost more than his car. Her hair was pulled back in the same effortless style. "Close the door," she said without turning around. Ethan closed it. The click of the lock sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet office. "Sit down." There were 2 chairs facing her desk. Ethan chose the one on the left and sat, his hands resting on his knees. He waited. Victoria turned away from the window and walked to the desk, but she didn't sit. She stood behind the chair, her hands resting on its back, looking at him with an expression he couldn't read. "I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer honestly." "Okay," Ethan said, though his mind was racing through possibilities, none of them good. "Yesterday, when you saw that photograph and I asked for your opinion, why did you tell me the truth?" Of all the questions he had expected, that wasn't one of them. Ethan took a moment to consider his answer. "Because you asked," he said finally. "And you seemed like you genuinely wanted to know." Most people, when their CEO asks them a question, tell her what they think she wants to hear. You didn't do that. "No, ma'am." "Why not?" Ethan met her eyes. "Because you probably can tell when people are lying to you. And because I think if you asked the question, you already knew the answer you usually get. Maybe you wanted to hear something different." Something flickered in Victoria's expression. She moved around the desk and sat down, the chair making a soft sound. "Do you know why I founded this company, Mr. Caldwell?" The question caught him off guard. "No, ma'am." "Because I wanted to build something that mattered. Something real." She looked down at her hands, perfectly manicured, resting on the desktop. "I was 24. I had an idea and no money, and people told me it couldn't be done. So I made it possible." Ethan didn't interrupt. He sensed she was going somewhere, and he needed to let her get there. 20 years later, I have everything I wanted. Success, wealth, influence. I sit in rooms with people who control billions of dollars, and they listen when I speak. She looked up at him. "And I can't remember the last time someone spoke to me like I was a human being instead of a balance sheet." The honesty in her voice surprised him. This wasn't the controlled CEO from yesterday. This was something raw, more vulnerable. "Yesterday you saw a photograph of me from 3 years ago. Do you know where it was taken?" "No, ma'am." "A lake near Chilan. I rented a cabin for a week, completely alone. No phone, no meetings, no one needing me to make decisions or approve budgets or solve their problems." She turned back toward the window. "That was the last time I felt like myself." Ethan wanted to say something, but he couldn't find the right words, so he stayed quiet and let her continue. "When you told me I looked like a human being instead of a position, I realized you had identified exactly what I had lost, and I couldn't stop thinking about it all day." Victoria's gaze returned to him, sharp and focused. "I kept replaying our conversation, analyzing it, trying to figure out whether you had some angle, some hidden motive for being honest with me." "I don't," Ethan said gently. "I fix computers. That's my angle." The corner of her mouth lifted slightly, almost a smile. "I know. I had my assistant pull your employee file. 3 years at Northlake Systems. Consistently strong performance reviews. Single father. 1 daughter, 8 years old. You live in an apartment in Riverside, drive a Honda Accord, and have never requested a promotion or a raise beyond the standard annual increase." The fact that she had investigated him should have felt intrusive, but somehow it felt like confirmation that yesterday had affected her the same way it had affected him. "You're invisible," Victoria said. There was no cruelty in it, only observation. "You do your job well, but no one notices you. You move through this building as if you don't exist." "That's accurate," Ethan admitted. "Why?" "Because I have a daughter who needs stability more than I need recognition. Because keeping my head down and doing good work means I keep my job. Lucy keeps her health insurance, and we keep our apartment. That's enough." Victoria studied him for a long moment. Then she opened a drawer in her desk and took out a folder. She placed it on the desk between them. "I'm launching a new internal initiative. A very small, very confidential team. It's focused on restructuring how we approach employee well-being and company culture. I need people on this team who will tell me the truth, not what they think I want to hear. Ethan looked at the folder, but didn't touch it. I want you on the team, Victoria said. At first, her words barely made sense. Ethan had to replay them in his head, trying to understand what Victoria Hale was actually offering him. I'm an IT technician, he said slowly. I don't know anything about employee well-being or corporate culture. No, Victoria replied. But you know what it feels like to be invisible in this building? She leaned forward slightly. You know what ordinary employees experience every day, because you are one of them. And you're honest. That matters more to me than expertise. Ethan's mind began to spin. This didn't make sense. CEOS didn't randomly invite low-level employees onto special projects just because of one sincere conversation. Why me? Ethan asked. There are hundreds, thousands of employees here. Why choose someone you only met yesterday? Because yesterday, Victoria said evenly. You looked at me and saw a human being. Everyone else in this building sees a title, a position, a source of approval, fear, or opportunity. But you saw a woman who looked peaceful in a photograph by a lake. That's the perspective I need. Ethan lowered his gaze to the folder on the desk. He thought about Lucy, about the stability his current job provided, about the risk of stepping out of the invisible role he had lived in for years. And he thought about the question Victoria had asked him the day before. Do you think I'm beautiful? About the way she had looked at him when he answered, as if, for the first time in a long while, someone had told her something real. What would this involve? Ethan asked. Meetings, Victoria replied. 2 or 3 times a week, mostly in the evenings. You'd keep your current position, but this would be additional work. A small team, 5 people, including you, completely confidential. We're trying to identify systemic problems in how this company treats its employees and find real solutions, not surface-level fixes. Would there be additional compensation? Ethan asked directly. Yes, she said. A 15% increase to your base salary, and a completion bonus when the project ends. 15%. The number echoed in Ethan's mind. That was the moment Lucy's college fund stopped being a vague hope and started becoming something tangible. But money wasn't the only thing giving him pause. Stepping out of the shadows, attaching his name to a project led personally by Victoria Hale, would change how people saw him, how they treated him. It would change everything. Can I think about it? Ethan asked. Of course. Victoria slid the folder toward him. Take it with you. Read the project overview. If you are interested, let me know before the weekend. Ethan picked up the folder. It felt heavier than it looked. I'm not trying to pull you out of your comfortable invisibility as a social experiment, Victoria said, her tone softening. I'm asking because I believe you have something valuable to contribute, and because I need people around me who aren't afraid to tell me when I'm wrong. Ethan stood, tucking the folder under his arm. He should have said something appropriate, professional, safe. Thank you for the opportunity. I'll give it serious consideration. But instead, he said, you should go back to that lake someday. Lake Chelan. Victoria looked at him, clearly surprised. You looked happy there, Ethan continued. Like you said, like yourself. Maybe, he paused for a beat. You need that more than another successful project. He left the office before she could respond, closing the door softly behind him. The elevator ride down felt completely different from the ride up. The folder tucked under Ethan's arm felt as heavy as 100 pounds. His mind spun with everything at once, possibilities and consequences, risks and opportunities. He had braced himself to be fired. Instead, he had been handed something he didn't quite know how to name. An opportunity, a variable, a risk. When he returned to his desk, Ethan hurriedly shoved the folder into his bag and forced himself to focus on the support tickets waiting to be handled. But his thoughts kept drifting back up to the 40th floor, to that office, to that conversation, to the look in Victoria's eyes when he told her she should go back to the lake. At 3:30, Ethan picked Lucy up from school. She talked about her day, and this time he listened. Really listened. Once they were home, he cooked dinner while Lucy did her homework at the kitchen table, everything unfolding in its familiar rhythm. After Lucy had gone to sleep, Ethan took out the folder. Inside was a carefully prepared project overview, timelines, objectives, team structure. Everything professional, clear, exactly as he had expected. Except for one thing. On the first page was a small handwritten note, written in neat, deliberate script. "Thank you for seeing me. VH." Ethan read it 3 times. Then he closed the folder and sat quietly in the empty kitchen, staring into the space in front of him, wondering, what would he say to her by the end of the weekend? That second night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in 3 years, he allowed himself to think about Linda. Really think about her. Not with the numbing pain he had used to survive the first 2 years, but with clear, vivid memories. Linda in the morning kitchen, wearing pajamas, hair messy, softly singing along to the radio while making pancakes for Lucy. Linda laughing as he told her about a ridiculous day at work, about the strange people he met, about the manager who once thought the cloud was a place you could physically go to retrieve files. Linda in the hospital bed, thin and frail, but still smiling when Lucy brought her drawings from school. Linda in her final days, her voice weak but firm. "Ethan, promise me. Don't disappear. Don't become a shadow. Lucy needs a father who is living, not just existing." He had promised. And then she died. And he had broken that promise. 3 years of being invisible, 3 years of safety, 3 years of fear. The next morning, Ethan stood in the doorway of Lucy's room, watching her sleep. In sleep, Lucy looked heartbreakingly like Linda. The same facial features, the same hair spread across the pillow. On the wall was a drawing Lucy had made the week before. A family, a father, a daughter, and on a cloud, a woman with angel wings. Below it, in colored pencil, Lucy had written, "My family. Mom watches me from above." Something broke open in Ethan's chest. Linda was watching him from above. And what would she think if she saw him living like this? Invisible, safe, afraid. "Don't disappear, Ethan." Ethan gently closed Lucy's door and went back to the kitchen. The folder was still there, beside the cup of coffee that had gone cold. He opened it again, reading each line slowly. Then his eyes settled on the handwritten note. "Thank you for seeing me." Victoria Hale, the woman who had everything, yet felt invisible. Ethan Caldwell, the man who had very little, yet had chosen to become invisible. Maybe they both needed this. Maybe this wasn't just a work project. Maybe this was a chance for both of them to find themselves again. On Thursday morning, before he could change his mind, Ethan picked up the phone and dialed the number on Margaret Doyle's business card clipped inside the folder. "Executive Administration. This is Margaret." "Hello, this is Ethan Caldwell. I need to speak with Ms. Hale about the project proposal. Please, hold." Hold music played. Ethan waited, his free hand tapping lightly against the desk. "Mr. Caldwell." Victoria Hale's voice came through the line, clear and professional. "Have you made a decision?" "Yes, ma'am," Ethan replied. "I'd like to accept the position on the team." There was a very brief pause. When Victoria spoke again, something in her tone had shifted. less rigid, less formal. I'm very glad to hear that. The first meeting will be Monday evening at 6 o'clock. Will you be able to arrange childcare? Ethan thought of his neighbor, Eleanor Finch, who occasionally watched Lucy when he had to work late. I can make arrangements. Good. Margaret will send you the details. She paused for a moment. And Mr. Caldwell? Yes? Thank you for taking the risk. The call ended before Ethan could say anything else. Ethan sat motionless at his desk for a long moment, staring at the phone in his hand, trying to understand what he had just agreed to. Around him, the third floor continued its familiar Thursday morning rhythm. Someone was still complaining about the coffee machine. Someone else was talking about weekend plans, ordinary life, ordinary problems. Except for one thing. Ethan's life had just stopped being ordinary. That evening, after dinner, Lucy sat drawing at the kitchen table, colored pencils scattered around her. Ethan pulled out a chair and sat across from her. Lucy, I want to tell you something. She looked up, pencil still in her hand. Did I do something wrong? No, not at all, Ethan smiled. I just wanted to say that I'm going to be taking on a new job, kind of like a special project at work. That means, on a few evenings during the week, Mrs. Finch will watch you while I go to meetings. Lucy tilted her head, studying him closely. Is that a good thing? I think it is, Ethan answered honestly. It's a little scary. But maybe it's a good thing. What would Mom think? Lucy asked softly. The question stopped Ethan short. Lucy rarely mentioned Linda so directly. He was quiet for a moment before saying, I think Mom would tell me to be brave. She always wanted me to be braver. Lucy nodded seriously, then turned back to her drawing. But before Ethan could stand, she reached out and took his hand. Dad, Lucy said, I think Mom would be proud of you. And in that moment, Ethan knew he had made the right decision. Monday evening arrived faster than Ethan had expected. He dropped Lucy off at Eleanor Finch's apartment at 5:30, along with her homework and a promise to be back before 8. Mrs. Finch, a retired schoolteacher who had lived in their building for more than 20 years, waved him off with a knowing smile. A big meeting? She asked. Something like that, Ethan replied. Lucy will be just fine. You go take care of whatever important thing you've got. Ethan stepped into the elevator at 5:45, heading up to the 40th floor. The building was much quieter at this hour. Most employees had gone home long ago. The reception area was empty, but Victoria had texted him earlier, giving directions to the conference room at the end of the hallway. He found it easily enough. Through the glass wall, Ethan saw 3 people already seated around the table. He recognized one of them, Andrew Foster from Legal, though they had never spoken directly before. The other 2 were complete strangers. Ethan pushed the door open and stepped inside. All 3 looked up. Andrew stood first and extended his hand. He was about 40, salt and pepper hair, with the confident posture of someone seasoned by years of experience. You must be Ethan Caldwell, he said. Andrew Foster, Legal. They shook hands. Andrew gestured to the other 2. This is Helen Price from Human Resources, and Jonathan Reed from Operations. Ethan shook hands with both, noticing the curious looks on their faces, the same question reflected in their eyes that he himself had asked when he received the invitation. Why was an IT technician in this room? Have a seat, Andrew said, indicating an empty chair. Ethan sat down, acutely aware of the contrast between his department store button-down shirt and the tailored designer suits the others were wearing. Helen was reviewing something on her tablet. Jonathan was writing in a leather-bound notebook that probably cost more than Ethan's entire work wardrobe. The door opened. Victoria walked in. Almost reflexively, everyone stood. She motioned for them to sit with a crisp gesture and took her seat at the head of the table. She was dressed in gray today, hair neatly tied back, her face fully set in CEO mode. "Thank you all for agreeing to be part of this project," she began without preamble. "This team was selected because each of you brings a perspective I need. Andrew, you understand the legal frameworks we operate within. Helen, you have direct insight into employee concerns and complaints. Jonathan, you understand the operational realities of implementing large-scale change." Then she turned her gaze directly to Ethan. "And Mr. Caldwell is here because he understands what it feels like to be invisible in this company." The bluntness of the statement drew every eye to Ethan. He felt his face warm, but he kept his composure. "The objective of this project is simple," Victoria continued. "I want to understand why talented people leave this company, why morale is declining despite competitive compensation, and what we can do to change that. But I don't want surface-level solutions. I want to understand the real problems." She opened the folder in front of her. "Over the next 3 months, we will conduct confidential interviews with employees at every level, collect data, and analyze patterns. Then we will present actionable recommendations for structural change." She looked around the table. "This work is absolutely confidential. Nothing said in this room leaves this room. Is that clear?" Everyone nodded. The meeting lasted 2 hours. They discussed methodology, timelines, interview processes. Ethan mostly listened, occasionally taking notes, trying to grasp the scope of what they were undertaking. Helen presented data from exit interviews that revealed troubling trends. Jonathan spoke about operational bottlenecks that frustrated middle management. Andrew outlined potential legal risks. When Victoria asked for Ethan's input, he nearly deflected, nearly said he had nothing to add. But then he remembered why he had been invited. "Most of the people I work with don't believe anyone at this level genuinely cares what they think," Ethan said. "They believe complaints disappear into a black hole. So they stop speaking up and accept things as they are." The room fell silent. Helen looked uncomfortable. Jonathan frowned. Victoria leaned forward slightly. "Explain," she said. "6 months ago, someone on my floor submitted a suggestion about lighting in the parking garage," Ethan explained. "It's too dark in certain areas, especially in winter when people leave after sunset." The suggestion was forwarded to facilities, and then nothing happened. The employee never received a response or an explanation. Now, whenever anyone asks him whether they should submit feedback, he tells them not to waste their time. "That's a facilities issue," Jonathan said. "Not exactly what we're addressing." "That is exactly what we're addressing," Victoria replied sharply. "This kind of dismissal is what makes people disengage, stop believing the company cares about anything beyond productivity." She jotted down notes quickly, then looked back at Ethan. "What else?" Over the next hour, Ethan realized he was talking far more than he had intended. About the small but persistent inequities employees dealt with daily. About the way executive assistants treated anyone below a certain pay grade. About how the third-floor break room waited 4 months for a functioning microwave, while the executive floor had full catering service. Some of it sounded trivial, but Victoria dismissed nothing. She probed, asked follow-up questions, demanded specifics. When the meeting ended at 8:15, Ethan was exhausted in an entirely different way. Not physically tired, but drained from being seen, from being heard, from being taken seriously, in a way he hadn't been for years. Everyone else left. Victoria remained behind, still taking notes. Ethan packed up slowly, unsure whether to leave or wait. "You did well tonight," Victoria said, without looking up. "I mostly complained about parking garage lighting." "You identified a systemic issue in how the company handles employee feedback," she replied. "That's valuable." She looked up. "How does it feel?" "Uncomfortable," Ethan admitted. "Like I'm betraying the people on the third floor by sitting at this table." "But you stayed." "I stayed." Victoria stood. "That discomfort is a sign you're doing something real. The moment you feel comfortable in these meetings is the moment you stop being useful to me." They walked out into the hallway together. The 40th floor was nearly empty now, lit by dim lights and distant machinery hums. "How's your daughter?" Victoria asked as they headed toward the elevators. "She's fine. Just worried about a friend who might be moving to California." "That's hard at that age, losing friends." "But she's resilient." At the elevators, Victoria pressed the call button. "I meant what I wrote in that note," she said, watching the closed doors. "About you seeing me. I haven't felt seen in a very long time." Ethan didn't know how to respond. The elevator arrived. They stepped inside and descended in silence. When the doors opened on the third floor, Ethan stepped out. He turned to say goodnight and found Victoria looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite name. "Same time next Monday," she said. "I'll be here." The doors closed. Ethan went home, lifted Lucy, fast asleep, and carried her to bed, standing there for a long moment watching her. His life had once been simple, invisible but safe, predictable and therefore comfortable. Now he sat at tables with executives, spoke openly about company culture, and was seen by a woman standing at the top of a billion-dollar empire, and just as alone there. Ethan closed Lucy's bedroom door and stood in the dark hallway. Something had changed tonight. Between him and Victoria. Between him and himself. He had stepped out of the shadows, and there was no going back. The weeks that followed unfolded in an entirely new rhythm. Daytime remained the familiar routine. Monday and Thursday evenings were reserved for project meetings. Ethan interviewed employees from different departments, listened to their stories, synthesized their feedback, and brought it back to the conference table. Some of what he heard simply confirmed what he had experienced for years. Some of it genuinely surprised him. At the third meeting, Helen shared turnover data, numbers that left the entire room silent. At the fifth meeting, Jonathan proposed structural changes, and Andrew immediately pointed out potential legal risks. By the seventh meeting, when Victoria asked Ethan what he thought about building an anonymous feedback system, his response reshaped the entire direction of the initiative. Gradually, Ethan stopped feeling like an imposter in those meetings. He began to find his voice, and realized that his perspective mattered not, despite having been invisible, but precisely because of it. And then, in brief moments between professional discussions, he and Victoria began having conversations that had nothing to do with corporate culture. Victoria asked about Lucy, about school, about her science project, about the small things that made her laugh. Ethan asked whether she still thought about Lake Chelan. Victoria spoke about the pressure of board meetings, where everyone wanted something from her, about never being able to turn off, never simply being Victoria, always being CEO Hale. Ethan talked about the exhaustion of single parenthood, about never feeling like he was enough, about the nights Lucy asked about her mother, and him not knowing which words were the right ones to say. They were becoming something neither of them could quite name. Not exactly friends, not merely colleagues, but a connection more honest, more complex than the familiar labels allowed. On a Wednesday morning in the 6th week, Ethan stepped into the elevator at 7 o'clock. Victoria was already there. Alone, she was wearing athletic clothes instead of a suit. Her hair was down, still damp, as if she had just finished a workout. They looked at each other, both surprised. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her lips curving into a small smile. Ms. Hale, you're in early. Lucy has a math test. She wanted extra practice before school. And you're a good father, for being here at 7 in the morning. So are you, Victoria laughed. A real laugh, not the polished tone of a CEO. I usually get here at 6. I slept in today. The elevator doors closed. It was just the two of them now in the soft light, while the building was still quiet. You look tired, Ethan said, then realized, sorry, I didn't mean… No, you're right. Victoria leaned lightly against the wall of the elevator. I am tired. Board meeting until 11 last night. Then I went home, alone, to an apartment that's too big, and I couldn't sleep. The raw honesty in her voice stopped Ethan short. You need rest, he said quietly. I need… Victoria paused, looking at him. I don't know what I need anymore. The elevator stopped on the 3rd floor. The doors opened. Ethan stepped out, then turned back. You deserve more than this, he said. More than just working and being alone. Someone should tell you that. Victoria looked at him, her gaze softening in a way he had never seen before. Someone just did, she replied softly. The elevator doors closed. Ethan stood alone in the empty hallway, his heart pounding, trying to understand what had just happened. On Thursday evening of the 8th week, after everyone had left, Victoria walked Ethan to the elevators, as she often did after meetings. I'm going back to Lake Chelan next month, she said. The cabin by the lake. 4 days, no phone, no meetings, no one needing anything from me. That's good, Ethan said. You should do that. I wanted you to know why I'll be absent from next Thursday's meeting. The elevator arrived. They both looked at it, but neither stepped inside right away. Thank you, Victoria said quietly, for taking the risk, for being honest, for not treating me like a title. Thank you, Ethan replied, for seeing me, for making me real. She smiled, a smile that reminded him of the photograph by the lake. Then she stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. Ethan stood alone in the empty hallway, understanding that something had changed between them over these past weeks. Something far beyond professional collaboration or mutual respect. A beginning of something neither of them had expected. Ethan took the stairs down to the 3rd floor, gathered his things, and drove home with Lucy. He cooked dinner, helped her with homework, did all the ordinary things that made up his ordinary life. But he no longer felt invisible. And somewhere, 40 floors above, in a room that was far too large, he thought that perhaps Victoria no longer felt entirely alone either. The story does not end with grand declarations or sharp, definitive conclusions. It ends with understanding, with connection, with two people who found something profoundly real in the fragile space between two worlds that once seemed impossible to touch. The project succeeds. The recommendations are implemented. Company culture begins to change, slowly but unmistakably. The parking garage lights are fixed. The microwave on the 3rd floor is finally replaced. An anonymous feedback system is launched, and this time, people truly believe that someone is listening. Ethan is no longer the man who passes by without anyone remembering his name. People know who he is now. They stop to talk to him in the hallways. They ask for his opinion, not out of obligation, but because they genuinely want to hear it. He is promoted, not because he asked for it, but because Victoria insisted. Those who see the problems, she says, need the authority to fix them. Lucy is doing well. Her best friend has moved to California, but Lucy has made new friends. She still draws pictures of her family. Only now, the father in those drawings is always smiling. Victoria returns from Lake Chelan with something different in her eyes. A kind of peace no one at the company has ever seen in her before. She begins leaving the office at 6 o'clock, twice a week. She learns to say no to certain meetings. She remembers that beneath the perfectly tailored suit, there is still a woman. One weekend evening, after the final team meeting, when the project officially comes to a close, Victoria stops Ethan near the elevators. "You changed this company," she says. "You changed me." "You changed me too," Ethan replies. "You showed me that being invisible isn't safe. It's just a slow way of disappearing." They stand there in the quiet hallway, where two once parallel worlds have collided and will never be the same again. "I've booked the cabin for 2 weeks next month," Victoria says, her voice softer than he has ever heard it. "There will be fishing. Does Lucy like fishing?" Ethan looks at her, his heart racing with the possibilities opening before him. "I'll ask her," he says with a smile. "Please do," Victoria says. There is something fragile in her eyes, hope, vulnerability, and a long-awaited chance. The elevator arrives. This time they step inside together. As the doors close, Ethan thinks of Linda, of the promise he once made. Don't disappear. Don't become a shadow. He kept that promise. At last, he kept that promise. In life, sometimes all we need is for someone to truly see us. Not for what we own, not for status or power, but for who we are. Ethan Caldwell taught Victoria Hale how to feel human again. Victoria Hale taught Ethan Caldwell how to stop being afraid of living. And sometimes, that is the greatest miracle of all. If this story touched you, if you have ever felt invisible, ever been afraid to step out of the safety of the shadows, subscribe to the channel to continue this journey with more stories to come. Who knows? In some moment, you too might be seen. Exactly when you need it most.